There is a silhouette on the skyline of Pyongyang that defies the logic of architecture, economics, and sanity. It rises from the gray, Soviet-style concrete blocks of the North Korean capital like a jagged tooth puncturing the sky. It is a pyramid of glass and steel, soaring 330 meters into the air. It is taller than the Eiffel Tower. It is taller than the Chrysler Building. It dominates the horizon from every single angle in the city, an unavoidable monolith of futuristic ambition. It is the Ryugyong Hotel, designed to possess 3,000 rooms, 5 revolving restaurants, and a casino. It was meant to be the crown jewel of the socialist paradise. It was intended to be the tallest hotel in the world, a defiant middle finger to the capitalist West and a declaration of North Korean supremacy. But for 20 years, it sat unfinished. It was a hollow shell of gray concrete, topped by a rusting construction crane that ceased to move in 1992. It was a ghost tower, whistling in the wind, devoid of windows, electricity, or life. Western diplomats dubbed it the Hotel of Doom. The locals, terrified to speak ill of the regime, simply pretended it wasn't there. For a decade, the North Korean government went so far as to airbrush the building out of official photographs and exclude it from maps, despite it being the largest structure in the entire country. This building is the ultimate paradox. It is a skyscraper built in a country where the electricity often fails at night. It is a luxury hotel built in a nation where famine killed hundreds of thousands. It is a casino built in a society where gambling is a crime. But the Ryugyong is more than just an architectural freak show. It is a physical timeline of economic collapse. Its foundations were poured with money borrowed from a dying Soviet Union. Its skeleton rose as the North Korean economy flatlined, and its eventual glass facade was paid for not with cash, but with a geopolitical barter deal involving a Middle Eastern telecom giant. This is not just a story about a building that stood empty for 3 decades. It is an autopsy of a financial disaster. It is the story of what happens when a dictatorship prioritizes concrete over bread and ego over economics. It is a 105-story tombstone for a dead ideology. Today on Built On Money, we are penetrating the Hermit Kingdom to investigate the Phantom Hotel. We are going to calculate the cost of the Kim dynasty's hubris and uncover how a project meant to save the nation's economy ended up becoming the world's largest and most expensive scarecrow. To understand the existence of a 3,000-room hotel in a country that receives fewer tourists than a small town in Idaho, we must step back into the geopolitical pressure cooker of the 1980s. The Cold War was not just fought with nuclear missiles, it was fought with skylines. Architecture was propaganda. And in 1987, North Korea was losing the war of perception. To the south, the arch-rival South Korea was undergoing an economic miracle. The miracle on the Han River had transformed Seoul from a war-torn ruin into a neon-soaked metropolis of high-tech industry. But the final insult came when Seoul was awarded the 1988 Summer Olympics. This was a catastrophic blow to the ego of Kim Il-sung, the great leader of North Korea. The Olympics were the ultimate global validation. The world was coming to the Korean peninsula, but they were going to the puppet regime in the south. Kim Il-sung needed a response. He needed a counter-Olympics. He successfully lobbied to host the World Festival of Youth and Students in 1989, a sort of socialist alternative to the Olympics. But hosting a global event requires infrastructure. It requires stadiums, roads, and most importantly, hotels. But the vision for the Ryugyong went far beyond mere utility. It was born of a specific, insecure jealousy. Just a year earlier, a South Korean firm had built the Westin Stamford in Singapore, which was then the world's tallest hotel. Kim Il-sung decided that North Korea would not just match that record, it would shatter it. The order was given: build a skyscraper that pierces the clouds. Make it 105 stories tall, a number chosen specifically because it sounded grander than the 100-story milestones of American skyscrapers. The design chosen was a pyramid. While some apologists claim it represents a mountain, engineering analysis suggests a darker, more pragmatic reason. North Korea lacked the advanced materials to build a standard vertical tower of that height. A pyramid, with its massive base and tapering top, is structurally more stable if you're forced to build, primarily with reinforced concrete rather than high-grade steel. The vision was pharaonic. The Ryugyong was designed to be a city within a city. It would house schools, hospitals, and shopping centers inside its massive sloping wings. It was to be the ultimate symbol of the Jewish ideology, self-reliance. But here lies the financial irony that undermines the entire project. Self-reliance was a lie. North Korea did not have the money to build this. In the late 1980s, the North Korean economy was already beginning to rot from the inside. The industrial machinery, installed by the Soviets in the 1950s, was rusting. Agricultural output was stagnating. The country was heavily dependent on aid and subsidized oil from the Soviet Union. To fund the Ryugyong, Kim Il-sung did the unthinkable for a communist hardliner. He looked for Western money. The regime actively courted foreign investment, promising that the hotel would include casinos and lounges, where Western laws would not apply. They anticipated that the hotel would generate millions in hard currency from foreign tourists. It was a delusion of the highest order. They were projecting occupancy rates of a global hub like Dubai or Las Vegas, in a city where foreign visitors are assigned government minders and forbidden from speaking to locals. The initial budget was estimated at $750 million. To put that in perspective, that sum represented roughly 2% of North Korea's entire gross domestic product at the time. Imagine the United States spending $500 billion on a single hotel. That is the scale of the financial recklessness involved. But the great leader had spoken. The ground was broken in 1987. The deadline was set for June 1989 to coincide with the Youth Festival. It was an impossible timeline, driven by political vanity rather than engineering reality. And as the excavators dug into the willow-covered bedrock of Pyongyang, they weren't just digging a foundation. They were digging a money pit that would consume the nation's reserves right before its darkest hour. Before we see how this concrete dream turned into a starving nation's nightmare, make sure you're subscribed to Built on Money to uncover more hidden economic histories. The construction of the Ryugyong Hotel was not an engineering project. It was a speed battle. In North Korean propaganda, labor is often framed in military terms. Workers are shock troops. Construction sites are front lines. The goal is not quality or safety. The goal is speed. The regime poured its meager resources into the site. Thousands of workers, many of them soldiers from the Korean People's Army, swarmed the site, pouring concrete 24 hours a day. But there was a critical flaw in the materials. Modern skyscrapers are typically built with a steel skeleton and a glass curtain wall. Steel is light, strong, and flexible. But North Korea had a shortage of high-quality steel. What they did have was cement. So, the Ryugyong was built almost entirely of reinforced concrete. This made the building impossibly heavy. As it rose, the sheer weight of the structure began to compress the lower levels. The elevator shafts, essential for a building of this height, reportedly began to warp and drift out of alignment. Rumors circulated in the diplomatic community that the concrete mixture was poor, diluted with too much sand due to shortages, making the structure brittle. The 1989 deadline came and went. The building was nowhere near finished. The Counter Olympics festival was held, costing the government billions, but the guests had to stay in older, smaller hotels. The Ryugyong stood as a naked, gray skeleton, looming over the festivities like an uninvited guest. But the real disaster struck in 1991. The Soviet Union collapsed. Overnight, the economic lifeline that had kept North Korea on life support was severed. The subsidized oil stopped flowing. The trade deals vanished. The North Korean economy went into free fall. Factories shut down. The power grid began to fail. The construction of the Ryugyong soldiered on for a few more months, a zombie project consuming resources that were desperately needed elsewhere. But by 1992, the reality was undeniable. The money was gone. The crane stopped turning. The workers laid down their tools and walked away. The building had reached its full height of 105 stories, but it was hollow. There were no windows, no fixtures, no wires. Just millions of tons of curing concrete exposed to the harsh Korean winter. The cost of this failure was astronomical. Estimates suggest that by the time construction halted, the regime had spent over $400 million on the shell alone. This was happening at the precise moment when the country was sliding into the arduous march, a four-year famine that would claim the lives of up to 3 million North Koreans. This creates a horrifying juxtaposition. On the skyline, a $400 million concrete mountain rose into the clouds. At its base, people were eating tree bark and grass to survive. The cement used to build the empty hotel floors could have been used to build thousands of homes or irrigation canals for the failing farms. The fuel used to power the cranes could have power tractors. For the next 16 years, the Ryugyong dominated Pyongyang as a monument to failure. It was too big to hide and too expensive to demolish. It simply sat there, rusting. The crane at the very top, abandoned in 1992, became a permanent fixture, a rusted weather vane pointing nowhere. International inspectors who viewed the shell from a distance concluded that the building was likely structurally unsound. The concrete was crumbling. The lift shafts were crooked. It was widely assumed that the Hotel of Doom would eventually collapse under its own weight, taking the surrounding neighborhood with it. But the regime found a way to deny reality. They simply pretended it didn't exist. Official photos of the skyline were doctored to remove the massive pyramid. Tour guides would distract visitors when the bus drove past it. It became a phantom hotel, visible to the eye, but invisible to the state. Would you have invested in this? If you were a Western bank in the 1980s, would you have loaned money to the Kim regime for a casino in Pyongyang? Let us know in the comments. For 16 years, the Ryugyong Hotel stood as the largest abandoned building on Earth. It was a concrete scar on the city, a constant reminder of the regime's economic impotence. The concrete was reported to be brittle, the elevator shafts misaligned, and the rebar rusting. By all laws of civil engineering and economics, it should have been demolished. But in a dictatorship, symbolism outweighs safety. To demolish the Ryugyong would be to admit that the great leader had made a mistake. And the great leader does not make mistakes. So it sat there rotting until 2008. Then, out of nowhere, the cranes began to move. The resurrection of the Ryugyong Hotel is one of the strangest chapters in the history of international business. It did not come from a sudden surplus in the North Korean budget. The country was still heavily sanctioned and impoverished. It came from a deal that can best be described as geopolitical. Ransom. Enter Orascom Telecom, an Egyptian conglomerate led by the billionaire Naguib Sawiris. Orascom saw an untapped market in the Hermit Kingdom, mobile phones. North Korea had virtually no cellular infrastructure, and the regime was finally willing to open a tightly controlled 3G network for its elite citizens. Orascom wanted the license. The North Korean regime wanted their eyesore fixed. The details of the deal remain opaque, buried in the secretive ledgers of Pyongyang, but the financial mechanics are widely understood by analysts. It was a barter to secure the exclusive rights to operate the Koreolink cellular network. Orascom reportedly agreed to finish the exterior of the Ryugyong Hotel. This was not an investment in the hotel itself. It was a market entry fee. Orascom poured an estimated $180 million into the building. But they didn't fix the crooked elevator shafts or the crumbling interior concrete. They simply dressed the corpse. Over the next 3 years, workers installed thousands of panels of mirror glass. The drab, gray concrete was hidden behind a sleek, futuristic blue facade. From the outside, the transformation was miraculous. The Hotel of Doom suddenly looked like a spacecraft ready for launch. It reflected the sky, hiding the emptiness within. This is the architectural definition of a Potemkin village. The The glazing was essentially lipstick on a pig. It was an aesthetic patch designed to allow the regime to claim victory. In 2012, for the centenary of Kim Il-sung's birth, the regime proudly unveiled the shiny exterior. The international press gasped. Had North Korea actually pulled it off? For a brief moment, it seemed they had fooled the world. In late 2012, the luxury hotel group Kempinski, a Swiss company synonymous with five-star opulence, announced that they would manage the hotel. They planned to open a partial section at the top of the tower. It was a PR coup, a Western luxury brand operating in the heart of the axis of evil. But the financial cracks were structural, not cosmetic. Kempinski abruptly pulled out of the deal just months later. In 2013, they cited market entry conditions, which is corporate diplomatic speak for "this is a suicide mission." The escalation of nuclear tensions and tightening sanctions made it legally and reputationally impossible for a Swiss company to operate there. Without a foreign operator, the Ryugyong had no business model. Who would stay there? North Korea receives only a few thousand Western tourists a year, and they are usually herded into the Yanggakdo Hotel, located on an island where they could be easily contained. The Ryugyong was designed for 3,000 rooms. To fill it, North Korea would need to increase its tourism numbers by 10,000% overnight. Furthermore, the operational costs of a 105-story building are astronomical. You need high-speed elevators, massive water pressure systems, and millions of watts of electricity for heating and cooling. In a city where the power grid is so unstable that residents keep batteries to run their lights at night, the Ryugyong would act as a black hole, sucking the energy out of the entire district. So, despite the shiny new glass, the doors remained locked. The driveway remained empty. The resurrection was purely cosmetic. Orascom had paid $180 million to glaze a tomb. And here is where the built-on-money analysis gets truly dark. The deal turned out to be a trap for Orascom as well. The Egyptian company successfully built the Koreolink network. They signed up millions of North Korean subscribers. On paper, they were making hundreds of millions of dollars in profit. But when they tried to take that money out of the country, the trap snapped shut. North Korea's currency, the won, is non-convertible. The regime refused to let Orascom exchange their mountain of North Korean won for US dollars or euros. The profits were trapped inside the Hermit Kingdom. The billionaire Cyrus had spent nearly $200 million fixing the hotel to get access to a market that paid him in monopoly money. It was a masterclass in authoritarian economics. The house always wins. If you're enjoying this breakdown of financial entrapment, please hit the like button. It helps us navigate the algorithm and bring you more investigations like this. By 2017, the Ryugyong Hotel had entered its third phase of existence. First, it was a skeleton. Second, it was a mirror. Now it became a screen. Unable to open the building as a hotel, the regime decided to turn it into the world's largest propaganda billboard. In 2018, engineers installed over 100,000 LED light fixtures into the facade of the building. At night, the entire 105-story pyramid lights up. It displays animations of the North Korean flag, slogans praising the Workers' Party, and cinematic clips of the country's history. It is a surreal spectacle in a city that is famously dark at night due to chronic power shortages, visible from space as a black void between China and South Korea. This massive tower blazes with light. It consumes precious electricity to broadcast messages to a population that is often shivering in the dark. This is the ultimate evolution of the Ryugyong. It has ceased to be a building in the functional sense. It has no tenants. It has no guests. It generates no revenue. It is purely an instrument of the state's ego. It is a 330-meter-tall status symbol that screams, "We are powerful," while masking the reality of economic stagnation. The collapse here is not physical. The concrete has surprisingly held up, likely due to the sheer over-engineering of the base, but economic. The opportunity cost of the Ryugyong Hotel is staggering. Let's do the math on the total expenditure. The initial construction in the late 80s cost an estimated $400 to $700 million. The Orascom glazing cost $180 million. The LED installation cost millions more. The total sunk cost approaches nearly $1 billion over 30 years. For a wealthy nation, $1 billion on a failed project is a scandal. For North Korea, whose GDP is estimated to be roughly $18 to $25 billion, depending on who you ask, this is a catastrophic waste of capital. That $1 billion could have purchased millions of tons of rice during the famine. It could have modernized the failing electrical grid. It could have imported medicine and fertilizers. Instead, it sits on the skyline, a beautiful, glowing, useless pyramid. The human cost is harder to quantify, but equally real. We must remember the soldiers and workers who poured that concrete in the biting cold of the late 80s. Defector testimonies describe brutal conditions on the construction site, with safety standards virtually non-existent. Accidents were common and hushed up. The speed battle mentality treated human life as a renewable resource, cheaper than the steel they lacked. Today, the area around the hotel remains strange. The walls surrounding the property are high. Guards patrol the perimeter. Unlike other famous landmarks where tourists flock to take selfies, the Ryugyong feels forbidden. It is there, looming over you, but you're not supposed to look at it too closely. The interior remains a mystery. A few brave Western journalists who were granted rare access to the lobby in 2012 described it as a cavern of bare concrete, with wires hanging from the ceiling and no interior walls. It was a shell. Since then, no foreigners have been allowed inside. Rumors persist that the regime is still trying to finish the interior floor by floor. But the math simply doesn't work. To finish the interior to a 5-star standard would cost another $2 billion. Money the regime simply does not have, especially as sanctions tighten around its nuclear program. The Ryugyong Hotel has become a zombie asset. It is dead, but it keeps moving, animated by the sheer force of political will. It is a hostage to its own size. It is too big to fail, but too broken to succeed. As we stand on the banks of the Taedong River, looking up at the Ryugyong Hotel reflecting the morning sun, we are witnessing the world's largest optical illusion. From a distance, it is magnificent. It is a sleek, futuristic shard of blue glass that rivals the Shard in London or the Burj Khalifa in Dubai. It looks like a symbol of prosperity. But as you get closer, the illusion holds, yet the reality changes. If you were to walk up to the doors, assuming the guards let you, and peer inside, you would see the truth. There is no lobby. There are no chandeliers. There's just cold, damp, 40-year-old concrete. The Ryugyong Hotel is the perfect metaphor for the North Korean state itself. It is a regime obsessed with the exterior, the military parades, the missile launches, the mass games. It spends billions polishing the surface to project strength to the world. But the interior, the economy, the agriculture, the daily lives of its citizens is hollow, dark, and crumbling. It is a skyscraper built on a foundation of lies. It was built to host tourists who were never legally allowed to enter. It was financed by a superpower that ceased to exist. It was glazed by a foreign investor who was never paid. And now, it serves as a television screen for a population that cannot afford televisions. What does this 105-story disaster teach us about economics? It is the ultimate case study of the sunk cost fallacy. In business, when a project fails, you cut your losses and walk away. You demolish the building and sell the land. But in a dictatorship, you cannot cut losses. To abandon the project is to admit that the great leader was wrong. So, the regime keeps spending. They spent millions to build it, then millions to hide it, then millions to glaze it, then millions to light it up. They're throwing good money after bad, trapped in a cycle of spending to protect a legacy that is already dead. It also reveals the inefficiency of command economies. In a free market, no bank would have loaned money for a 3,000 room hotel in a closed country. The market would have killed this project at the feasibility stage. But in a command economy, where the state controls the banks, the labor, and the land, there are no checks and balances. The whim of the dictator overrides the laws of supply and demand. The Ryugyong exists not because the market demanded it, but because one man commanded it. In the year 2050, what will the Ryugyong Hotel look like? It is unlikely it will ever open. The cost to fit out the interior with modern plumbing, wiring, and safety systems would likely exceed the cost of building a new tower from scratch. The concrete shell, exposed to the elements for decades, is a ticking time bomb of structural degradation. The most likely scenario is that it will stand for another century as a silent sentinel. It will remain a phantom tower looming over Pyongyang. Future archaeologists, digging through the ruins of our civilization, might look at the Ryugyong and be confused. They will find a massive structure that served no purpose, a hotel that hosted no guests, a casino that dealt no cards. They will find it to be a temple, not a temple to a god, but a temple to hubris. It is a monument to the dangerous idea that political will can overcome economic reality. North Korea wanted to build a tower to touch the sky. Instead, they built a tombstone for their own economy, a glistening 105-story warning to the world. You can build anything you want, but you cannot build an economy on concrete and coercion alone. This is built on money. We expose the cost of the world's most expensive mistakes. If you want to see the financial autopsy of more mega projects that went bankrupt, subscribe to the channel. The truth is always in the ledger.